is a package that I helped to develop with Alex Lum, building on the work of several previous people who had worked on this package. It is a package called Wikidata R, and it's specifically for a programming language called R. For those who haven't heard of R as a programming language previously, R is an interesting language in that it is used a lot by researchers and data analysts and data visualizers, and it's very good at handling data. In some ways, it's kind of similar to Python for people who have come across Python, but it's much more focused around data analysis, manipulation, and things like that. Until recently, there was a package within R that allowed you to read from Wikidata to an extent, but there was nothing that allowed you to write back to Wikidata. And there are a lot of functions that you might expect to be able to require to move information backwards and forwards between Wikidata and running R on your computer that were lacking. So as I mentioned, along with Alex Lum, I developed an extension of this package and sort of took over working on it. And I'll just quickly show you what R looks like. So this may be a little bit intimidating, but I'll just briefly break down what I'm looking at. So this is a program called R Studio. And the way it's broken up is this top left-hand panel is just your notepad. It's where you can just type notes and it's what you're working on. And you can save documents and lines of code in it. Below that, this is what is actually being run in the programming language R. Up in the top right-hand side is just the list of the files and pieces of data that you're working on. So you can see that if I type in x equals 2, then I get this little thing down here that says values, and it says x has the value of 2. And of course, that's something very simple where I'm just assigning a variable to a number, but you can also, these can also be URLs. So you can see here's an article URL, a list of DOIs. So here's a list of 5 DOIs and so on. And then down at the bottom is just, bottom right is just a help function to tell you a little bit about some of the functions that you're using at the time. So this is kind of how R looks. You can plug in more user-friendly kind of web pages to it. So there's a whole environment called Shiny, which allows you to make quite user-friendly web pages. But I'm just going to be talking within this terminal for the moment. So this is just using R Studio. And so I guess I'll show a couple of small things that are now possible with this Wikidata R package. And to do that, I'm just going to quickly get up Wikidata R help file just to give you an idea of what that, what information that has in it and what that looks like. So I'll just click on that. So Wikidata R, the main thing that I think is useful about it is its ability to both read from and write to Wikidata. So I'll do a read from example first, and then I'll maybe do a write to example afterwards. So this is I've got a table of a whole load of academics here. And in that table, I want to be able to see, firstly, how long they've been at a university, which university they're at, what position they hold, and what their areas of expertise are. So let's just look at the top of that table currently. So this is a part of that table. And you can see here we've got a particular person. They have a user ID within the university. They have a staff ID within the university. They have a username, so that's the first half of their email address. And then here I've got some information of, do they have an ORCID number? Yes or no. Do they have a Scopus ID? Yes or no. Do they have a researcher ID? Yes or no, etc. department, school, college arrival date, etc., etc., etc. So it's a big table of information, and this is some information that I want to do a few things with. So the first thing is I've got all of these names, but I don't know what their Wikidata QIDs are. I've also got these various different things like the department and the school and the college, and it might be useful to identify whether there are existing Wikidata items for that. Another one of the variables is their positions. So I'll give you the list of those. So here's the list of all of the different positions that they list: graduate researcher or casual academic or adjunct professor. There's all sorts of different positions that they might have. And some of these might be effectively the same thing, right? So for example, we've got one position that is lecturer, and we've got another position that is lecturer common public health, or lecturer common nursing, or lecturer in management. But these we would say, oh, you know what, they're sufficiently equivalent that I'm not going to create separate Wikidata items for all the different versions of the word, all the different versions of lecturer. So how do I go about finding, well, what are the most relevant Wikidata items to describe each of these? So one of the new functions that is possible within Wikidata is, within this R package in Wikidata, is I can run this function here, and it's going to say, let's disambiguate the variable graduate researcher. So it's looking for the search string graduate researcher, and the very first thing it found was this Q number here, a graduate student, a person receiving graduate education. Well, maybe that's it, but I don't think that's really what we mean by graduate researcher. So I could say, yes, that's the one I mean. No, I don't mean that, and I don't think you're going to have anything better than that, so let's just move on. Or A, give me some alternatives. And the reason that it requires you to say A to give you alternatives is it just speeds it up a lot. If it looks for all of the alternatives each single time, it means that things take a little bit longer. Or if you type in a Q number, it'll just take that as the QID that you are intending. Or you could type in some specific text if for example, graduate researcher was spelt wrong. And I was like, oh, well, that's why it's not found graduate researcher. It's because it's spelt graduate wrong. I could type in graduate researcher spelled correctly and search for that instead. You can say, well, I don't think there's an item on that in Wikidata currently. You know what, we should just create a new item for this, or I can press S to stop here and just continue for this later. And the final one is a question mark, where if I need more information on this, I can just type question mark and it'll open up this Wikidata item in my browser so I can see all of the rest of its information. For this one, I'm going to say, let's look at alternatives and see if there's a better example. And here it said, I've searched for other things called graduate researcher as an alternative term, and I'm still only finding the same one, and graduate student, person receiving graduate education. So for the moment, I'm going to say, I don't actually think that that's good enough. I think that I do want to create a separate item for graduate researcher versus graduate student. So I'm just going to go C for create. Okay, next one, casual academic. That's much easier. Casual academic is an academic or scholar that is not ongoing or full-time. Yeah, perfect. That's the thing I mean. Yes. Adjunct professor, indicating non-time full-time employment as a professor. Yep, that's the one. Yes. Senior lecturer, etc. So I can say yes or no to these. Yep. Adjunct associate professor. Yes. Here we get to honorary, and again, this is one where it's saying honorary. Do you mean the Wikimedia disambiguation page for honorary? Well, that's clearly not what we mean. So let's see if there's any alternatives. And if I look for alternatives here, it's probably going to provide me with a few more options. Yep, here we go. So it's saying, oh, did you mean honorary citizenship or honorary degree or honorary member? And actually, none of these are correct. Like, none of these are the sorts of items that I'm talking about. So again, I might want to, in this case, say, you know what, actually, what I mean is an honorary professor. So I'm going to say I'm going to eventually create a new one for that. And again, here, the next one gives me honorary associate. It's asking me, do I mean the scientific article about honorary associates published on April, da, da, da. So at this point, you kind of get the idea as to how it's presenting this information for me to be able to try and reconcile which Wikidata items I mean. At this point, I'm just going to hit stop, and we'll stop here. And it says, okay, stopping, you've completed 6 so far with 34 remaining. To restart this list, where you left off, you can just use the output of this function as the input for running the same command again. And let's just look at that object that I just created. So I'm going to look at it so far, and you can say, okay, here we go. We started with graduate researcher, and we said, yeah, graduate researcher, we're going to need to create something new for that. Casual academic, yep, we found the Wikidata item for casual academic, and we assigned it this Q number, etc., down that list until we stopped at this point. And you can see how it would eventually continue going down that list until we finished all of the items. So this is quite useful as a way of disambiguating strings and assigning Wikidata, existing Wikidata items to them. Sometimes, of course, we don't need to disambiguate strings. We might want to disambiguate something that is easier to do. So like some kind of unique identifier, like an ORCID number. And that's similarly possible to do if I just quickly go to Wikidata R. I'm just going to pull up an example that I've previously written in the manual here. So this is just the GitHub page where all of the documentation and working versions of the code are installed. You can always install the full version over from CRAN, which is the kind of the repository for these packages for the fully tested stable version, or you can download this version that is the most up-to-date but still in development version from the GitHub page. And I'm just going to use the QID from identifier item here. So this is if I have some existing identifier. Let's say I have the ISBN and I want to get out the Wikidata number for it. So let's search for that. So this is something that's a lot simpler because I'm not going to have to disambiguate in the same way that I did for the concept of a lecturer or the concept of a casual academic. And if I search for that now, there we go. It just provides me with the Wikidata item immediately. Because Wikidata also has multiple identifiers for a lot of items, it's also quite a useful way to translate between different identifiers. So for example, if I've got the ORCID, if I take this example here, I have started with the ORCID ID for someone, and I could initially just say, you know, find me those ORCID, find me the QIDs for these ORCID IDs. But actually, I want to say, well, no, translate these ORCID IDs for a researcher into an IMDb ID for their work in film and television. And let's do it for these two people, this ORCID number here and this ORCID number here. I'll hit go on that. And what it's going to do is it gives me a little progress bar. And it's converted this ORCID number into a particular IMDb ID and this other ORCID number into a different IMDb ID. Obviously, this only works for people who have both an ORCID number and are present in IMDb. So I think that this is, well, actually, let's look at who these are as examples. So I'll pull up this ORCID here, and we will go over to Google ORCID, and I'll look at that ORCID number here. So this is the ORCID number for Anthony Fauci, the American director of the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Disease, and also their chief medical officer currently. And it also turns out that they are in IMDb. So if I go over to IMDb, and search for that identifier, I get up Anthony Fauci, who was an actor in Christmas in Florida. And so that's a way to use Wikidata as this intermediary. You'll notice that at no point in this command above did it tell me what they were in Wikidata, because I didn't ask for that information. I just asked to translate from one item to another. So it's a useful intermediary for translating between different identifiers. And I think the other interesting way that you can use this in that regard is being able to get full lists of items. So, for example, a little bit like a lot like a Sparkle query, because what it's doing behind the scenes is a Sparkle query, is being able to pull out a whole load of information altogether. So let's run this little series of statements. So I'll just copy those into my terminal here. So what I'm asking it to do here is find the QIDs for these papers. I've given it a list of DOIs, 1, 2, 3 DOIs. So it's finding the QID. It's then downloading the Wikidata item for each of those. It's then extracting some claims from these, in this case, the main topic claims, and then it's going to get names from those properties. The other thing that I wanted to quickly note here is that when I was talking about ORCID IDs and IMDb IDs, I just had to put this in plain text. I could put in the P number to indicate the property I was talking about if I knew it. But if I don't put in the P number, it's going to try and find out what's the most likely property that I meant when I asked for this. So in fact, I'll just quickly rerun this one again. So let's say instead of saying ISBN 13, I just said ISBN. It's going to say, oh, there isn't actually a thing in Wikidata, a property in Wikidata called ISBN. I'm going to assume you meant ISBN 13, P212, and I'll use that. Or I could tell it, yeah, I did mean P212, and it'll just use P212. Or I could do something that it doesn't recognize at all. And if I run that, it's just going to say, look, I'm sorry, I wasn't able to return anything for you. There's no property that looks like this thing that you stated here. So I've just had to say that there's nothing applicable and give that back to you. So it tries to be reasonably smart in how it interacts with Wikidata for those sorts of things. But yes, so let's try this bit of code that I've stated here. So I'll do it line by line first. So this is just finding the QIDs for these 3 different articles. So I'll just copy that in here and we'll have a look. Yep, so a DOI, a DOI, a DOI, and it's found 3 QIDs for those. Excellent. So let's look at the next line of that. So now it's going to download the entire Wikidata item for each of those. So previously it just told me the number. Now I'm going to get it to get up the, oops. Now I'm going to tell it to actually get up the items. So that took a little bit longer. But if I then copy this down here, it's going to show me those as a list. So I'm just going to ask it to show me the first one. So let's look at just the first one. And you can see that it's pulled down a whole load of information about this Wikidata item. I'm not going to go into it in detail, but this is basically the full Wikidata item in its entirety. Okay, well, that's not super useful. I didn't want all of that. I'd like to just go into that. I'd like to extract the claim specifically for the main topic here. And again, I've put main topic as plain text. I haven't put in the P number because I can't remember the P number. So let's get me the main topic. And it said, oh, again, inexact match for main topic. Did you mean main subject, P921? Yeah, excellent. That is what I meant. So I can now look at the main topics for each of those. And again, it's put that all into a very detailed log. And then I can just get names from the properties for all of these, and it's going to reformat this all into something a bit more easy on the eye for a human reader. And so here we go. It said, oh, for this first one, I've pulled out the first main topic was rotavirus. For the second one, we've got 3 main topics: Ebola, West African Ebola virus epidemic, Ebola virus and epidemic. And for the third one, I've found readability, health information on Wikipedia, and Wikipedia as its main topics. So that's a whole load of reading from Wikidata, and you can see how it's now a lot easier if you are a user of R to be able to pull information out of Wikidata. And I'm just going to use an example that Alex Lum actually wrote for putting some data into Wikidata. And this all relies on using the quick statements format. The reason that we use quick statements for adding information over to Wikidata is that it actually aligns quite well with how R structures data when it's holding it. It likes to put it in these sort of quite structured tables, and that's exactly the same way that quick statements works when you're writing up a whole load of quick statements. So the two formats actually work quite well. So here's an example where I've got another article DOI I'm interested in. I'm interested in this particular article, and I'll just work out the URL and the QID for that. So once again, working out the URL is pretty easy. I'm just pasting this prefix in front of that DOI. And to work out the article QID, again, I'm getting that QID from a DOI from Wikidata. So again, I can have a look at that. Yep, here we go. Here's the DOI above, and here's the QID underneath. All right, excellent. This next step is going to go into the HTML for that article web page, and it's going to try and pull out all of the references. So it's pulling out all the references straight from the HTML. So let's have a look at that. We can see the reference list here. Okay, it's found 5 references for it. It's then going to extract this str extract is finding strings that look like DOIs, essentially. So it's going to find a DOI this reference, it's going to find a DOI in this reference, another DOI here, another DOI here, and another DOI here. So we're expecting to find 5 DOIs. So let's run that as well. And if I look at DOIs here, it should just give me a list of 5 DOIs that it managed to find out of that unformatted reference text. Yep, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 DOIs. Again, we're going to do the same trick of getting the Wikidata item from those DOIs to get a list of 5 Wikidata items. But in this case, I think not all of these items are in Wikidata yet. So let's have a look. Yep, here we go. We can see for each of these 5, we've got NA, a Wikidata item, NA, Wikidata item. So out of these 5 references, only 2 of them were already in Wikidata. But let's say that I wanted to take the article that I originally started with and say that it cites these Wikidata items that I just put in. So I'm going to format this up as a tibble, which is a standard Wikidata formatting system. So I'm going to tell it I'm planning on writing this to Wikidata, and you can see here, for those of you who've used quick statements before, we've now got the item that we want to write to, the property that we want to write, and in this case, this is the property cites work, and then it cites nothing, it cites this article, it cites nothing, it cites nothing, it cites this article. If we wanted to, we could also indicate which reference this was by adding in the qualifier of series ordinal. So we can say specifically that it cites this item as its second reference, if that's the sort of thing that you're into. This is just showing it as a tibble here that we could copy and paste over into quick statements if we wanted to do it manually. But even nicer, we can write it straight over to Wikidata via quick statements here. So I actually haven't put in my username and token. I'm going to have to do that now. So I'm just going to, I think as my very last thing, actually submit this to Wikidata as a live demonstration and see if that actually works. So I'm just going to quickly find out my Wikidata token. So this API token here, you have to go over to quick statements. And if you click on your username up in the top right-hand corner, it'll tell you your token that you are using. Here we go. This is my token here, this long string. So it's not the same as your password, but it's a unique identifying token that is generated based on your username and password. And so I'm now going to be able to write straight to the API. In fact, actually, before I do that, I'm going to quickly tell it that API submit false. So I'm not actually going to submit to the API yet. I'm just going to tell it what, I'm just going to make it show me what it's planning on sending over. And so if I hit that, it'll write up this, and this is the statement that is about to be sent over to the quick statements API. You can see, here we go, it's going to tools, WMF labs, quick statements API / blah, 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 and this is what it's going to write. Okay, I trust that that's correct. So I'm now going to go back here and I'll remove this API statement equals false. Or I can do the same thing as saying it's true. I'd like you to submit it now. And if I hit go, it's now going to go over to this, and it said status OK, fantastic. I'll just quickly look over at quick statements, and it will say my latest batches. And here we go, latest batch is currently running. So this is the batch that I've, command that I just sent over to quick statements to take this item and says sites work, nothing. So you can see how it still creates a command here, but these commands will be ignored because, of course, they're invalid because there was no Wikidata ID, but it will run through this and this. And so if we go over to this item now, this is a slight cheat because I think Alex has already written those sites work statements over here. So it actually already had this. So it's just going to try and do that again, even though they've already got them. But yep, here you go. You can see it's running through that, and it said, yep, we've done 2 of those because it did this one and this one. 3 errors for the 3 that didn't have Wikidata items already existing. So again, if we were keener on this item, we might be able to write in R some more sophisticated script that will then create those missing items and then move in some information and then link up all those Wikidata items together. So with that, I realize that I've come to the end of my time, so I will stop my share. I'm always happy to answer questions if people have anything that has come up in their mind. If you're keen on R, feel free to contact me or contact Alex Lum, and we'll happily talk to you about all sorts of things to do with integrating data sources and doing data manipulation and handling and the integration between that and R and Wikidata.